Hello and welcome back to Ready Nerd Go, our podcast talking about tabletop RPGs and all their related bits. My name is Enko, and my lovely coworker here is Alex,
Did
and
you just
we're
call me a coworker?
yep, and you're gonna deal with it. So now that you've heard his voice, I suppose I do need to throw in the, what is it, sponsored by Comic Hunter is how we're saying it?
Yeah, sponsored by, brought to you by comichunter.net, where
There
you
we
can
go.
find all of your lovely nerdy shit and needs.
For those of you who are repeated listeners, this is my first time doing the intro, and it is probably very obvious to all of you. But I'm having fun.
I,
Today we're going to be talking about homebrew, and I don't think, Alex, have you ever actually done anything along the lines of homebrew? I'm kind of curious now I'm thinking about it.
no, unless you've done something homebrew and I'm not aware of it.
Oh yeah, no,
And
I've
I,
definitely.
I say that because the only game I played prior to working or being at the Comic Hunter was some form of D&D, and that was maybe like 4 sessions before we realized it just wasn't working. Again, going back to previous episodes, it was a time commitment thing that I couldn't do.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm aware, unless you've never done a homebrew or anything like that, then no, I've never done it, and it's always something I've been curious about since reading. But it's one of those things where when we were talking about what do you want to talk about, I'm like, well, I want to learn about homebrew, and if I want to learn about it, and it's a subject that does come up on forums, Reddit. I assume people also into D&D and tabletop RPGs go to Reddit to learn about shit too.
Yeah, there's a
That's
couple
what
of
I do.
solidly sized subreddits for
And
them.
well, what the hell is homebrewing? And I know someone who can answer that question, and I also know two people that need a topic for a podcast. So why don't I combine the two? That was a very long-winded way of saying no.
I mean, people are here for the long-windedness at this point, let's be honest. I guess if we're gonna define what homebrew is, which is the important part, because some people define it differently. Some people define it very differently. But there's the difference between homebrew of just making stuff up, like on the fluff non-mechanical level, and then there's the like mechanical side of making up homebrew. Most people when they're talking about homebrew, they're talking about like making the mechanical side of things. Like for instance, if you wanted to make a new monster and you wanted to know what stats to use for the monster, not many people are going to call it homebrew if I make up an NPC called Gary, and you know, that's not homebrew. That's just part of the default experience. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So generally, people tend to start leaning towards, and well, like there's also the other biggest part of homebrew is changing the actual core rules of the game itself, which personally I think more people jump into a lot sooner than they need to be. I'm a big proponent of, and I guess this kind of segues very neatly into when should you homebrew. But I'm a very big proponent of, especially when you're playing a new system, if you're playing a system you've never played before, don't homebrew anything for the first few sessions at least. Because,
Now,
no, go for it.
I'm assuming that there are different levels to homebrewing too. Right? There's a difference between a fully homebrewed adventure and I'm gonna throw in this villain monster whatever that I've cobbled together that I think works, but it need it for the setting, but it's not. Otherwise, we're going to be playing a Shadow of the Demon Lord, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder 2e adventure that just happens to have this random villain that, because of the story reasons and the GM wanting to be funny, is basically Wolverine.
Yeah, I've seen that happen before. But yeah, that's why I was trying to kind of like separate the difference between the mechanical homebrew of either tweaking the mechanics of the game or coming up with new mechanics, or like making new rules to work with, and the more I I don't think this term is really appropriate for it, but it's close to I think right now. Like the fluff side of things, like making up the story and stuff for a game. Like if I'm making up a campaign for you guys and I'm plotting out the story and deciding who the characters are, I would not consider that homebrew unless I'm actually making like the rules related stuff outside of what the game system already provides me. So like if I'm making up like Lord Windshire or something, and I have all this elaborate backstory for him, but I'm just using the like noble NPC stat block, I wouldn't consider that homebrew because that's using the tools that were provided by the game system that we're using. Like the actual like creative make believe part, I don't personally consider homebrew. It's the making up new rules or mechanics or modifying the mechanics or rules of the system to support what you're trying to create. That's when I would consider it homebrew.
For example, creating a Molotov in a system that doesn't have Molotovs but has the equipment to
Exactly.
create. Okay, that makes sense.
and
The
and it's that's also where it would go into the whether you're just making a rule at the table or whether you're coming up with something outside of the table and bringing it to the table, because generally if I'm making a rule in the moment, I wouldn't really consider it. I also wouldn't really consider that homebrew in as much as I'm just trying to make a ruling to keep the game going. But like if I after the fact sit down, stat out, okay, this is exactly how Molotov cocktails work in this system because it doesn't give me the rules for it, then that's when I would consider it homebrew.
Now I'm sure that different people would have different levels of what they consider homebrew,
Oh yeah.
not unlike how different people have different levels of what they consider a sandwich. For example, is a folded pizza a sandwich or is it just a folded pizza?
Yep.
Well, we may never know.
Is a burger a sandwich?
Exactly. So we, I know you and I would get it, not a debate, but we would get into different, like that would tangent us significantly quickly. And while we do have an idea later on at some point for a topic similar to that that will allow us to tangent more than normal,
Hmm.
that's not what we're here. So we've covered a bit about what homebrewing is. Um, and your definitions for it, and because this is a show where you have the expert opinion on that, that is currently the definitions for homebrewing as far as we're concerned right now.
Yes.
What you haven't touched on, and I know you're getting to, because I know this is the way your brain works, when should you homebrew something versus, so you touched a bit on homebrewing versus immediate ruling, but
Yep.
when should you actually plan to homebrew something?
So I very briefly touched on it first when I don't think you should homebrew, which is when you're brand new to a system and running it for the first time. I do think in that situation you should try to run the game as straight as to what's written in the rules as possible. And there's a few different reasons for that. The main one just being that how you understand something read in the book isn't necessarily how it's going to actually feel when played at the table. I've seen on many occasions new and even experienced GMs who will be playing a new system and they'll be, oh, I don't like that rule. I don't like how this works. I'm going to change this. I'm going to change this. And then they've made a bunch of changes. We play the game and we have a horrible time. They're like, well, the system sucks. Like, does it though? Because we haven't actually played the system the way it was meant to be played. So we don't know if the changes you made actually helped anything, or if they just or if they just made things worse trying to solve a problem that didn't actually exist.
That's a very valid point because I know that you have changed things in Shadow of the Demon Lord as we've been going to give a better experience. And
Yes.
that to me is, again, it goes back to what you had said. It's that's more of a in the moment decision versus an in the moment decision that, yes, does manipulate some of the rule systems. but you're reacting to give the players a better time versus, oh, I'm going to change all of this and then we're going to play. Oh, none of this is working, which is a failed homebrew.
Exactly. And I
Is
also have a lot of experience with Shadow the Demon Lord too,
uh
so I know where what I consider to be its weak points. And to be clear, that is its weak points for the style of game I'm trying to play, not necessarily, weak points of the system for this experience it is trying to present, because
that's
those are two
actually
very different things.
that's a very valid point. Like, would you consider the Shadow of the Demon Lord game you're running to have to be partially or have some level of homebrew in it, or is it just a modification to allow for a different style of game? And if that's the case, again, it goes back to where does the difference lie?
Oh, it definitely has some homebrew in it. Like by default, the way Shadow the Demon Lord works is it's a very episodic game. The idea, and the designer has been very open about this, is that the idea is that it was made for busy adults who don't have the time to like get together every week to play and have a big involved campaign. It was meant for, you go in, you have a bunch of standalone separate adventures that may have a through line, they may not, but it's the original intention is that each self-contained adventure is supposed to be one level. So like if you go and you save the mayor's daughter from a troll, you level up. You go and you plumb the dungeons for this artifact, then you level up. And it's each discrete adventure that you then gain a level from. Because I'm using the system for a mega dungeon, and the system's not really designed to be run for a mega dungeon. There's systems that are honestly a lot better for mega dungeons, but I'm comfortable with this, and it's meant to be a side game anyway. So I modified the way leveling up works to accommodate for that, because there is no distinct start and end point for adventures in the system. It's just you delve in and you delve in and you delve in, and sometimes you might come back with nothing. Sometimes you might come back with enough money to like suit you all in new armor. It's a mega dungeon. The experience that a mega dungeon facilitates is not the experience that Shadow the Demon Lord was designed to accommodate. So I've tweaked some of the rules to make that accommodation work better.
So I suppose in that case, the example you gave, it's a not a full homebrew, but it is a tweaking of.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I suppose you could also argue that it is a homebrew using Shadow of the Demon Lord as the basis.
Yeah, and that gets into like at what
I
point do you
I was
consider, cause like
I was just going to say we're circling back to the sandwich analogy, and
yeah,
I realize that what I'm doing is that I'm trying to find a hard cutoff again for
and
what
there
I
isn't.
just said. There isn't a hard cutoff. It's
Yeah.
like this is a like you said, it's not a full homebrew adventure because it's just a dungeon delve, but the mechanics are very much from an established game that haven't been changed other than someone creating a Molotov cocktail because they thought it was funny. The mechanics haven't changed. It's just you've adjusted the leveling up to allow for the different style of game that is being played.
Yeah. And generally speaking, how people tend to like how I would advise people to kind of approach getting into homebrew, and obviously experiences may differ, but how I would personally advise it is generally the GM is the one who does the homebrewing. Like players are very rarely going to be the ones introducing homebrew into a system, except for I'm going to circle back to that one later, but I'm going to get massively derailed if I continue that thought tangent.
I think I know exactly where it's going.
Yeah, but generally speaking, the GM is the one doing the vast majority of the homebrew, because like making up new monsters or modifying the base rules, either because they want to add something in, they want to take something out, they want to change how something works. Generally, how I find most GMs tend to kind of like graduate into homebrewing is that the first and most basic kind of like homebrew, and I'm putting it in air quotes here because whether or not you consider it homebrew, whatever, is taking, because it usually boils down like monster stat blocks are where people tend to start with their homebrewing, and like the first thing that most people do is they'll tweak the numbers very slightly, either because they want to, adjust how strong something is, or they want to, add a new ability to it. Like, maybe you want your troll to have more defense or more hit points or a stronger attack, so you bump those numbers up a bit. Then there's, okay, I want to have, a dragon in this game, but there's no stats for a dragon. So I'm going to find the creature in here that most resembles a dragon, and then I'm going to refluff it to be a dragon, but I'm going to use the original creature's mechanics. Like, it's just you're slapping a fresh coat of paint on it and calling it something else. But mechanically, it works. You haven't changed anything.
I feel like if you're a developer, then you know exactly how that works.
Yeah. Reskinning all
Yep.
the time. And then you kind of graduate into, actually designing your own monsters, where, you've usually, this is after you've had a lot of experience with the system, or enough experience in general to kind of gauge what's going on with the system. And that's where, you use like the existing monsters and how things are done as inspiration to create something of your own whole cloth. So, like, to go back to the example of the dragon, if you want to run a dragon as a monster in the system and there's no dragon stats, you could take the closest thing and reskin it into a dragon, maybe change a couple of the numbers, say it can fly, whatever. Or you can look at how monsters in the system are built and go, okay, so I know all monsters need, hit points, armor class, these set of abilities. Those are the baseline that everything needs to have. So that's where I'm going to start, figure out what a dragon should have, and then add on the extra abilities and add on everything that needs to be done, and then kind of, create the monster using the existing monsters and the mechanics of the game as your baseline, because, mechanics are how you interact with it. The mechanics need to match the existing system, or else it's just pointless. You can't say, oh, save for fire, when save for fire doesn't exist in the game.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
But, you create the monster whole cloth out of that. And then there's the sideline of, creating entirely new mechanics for, like, the player facing side of things, like adjusting how the player facing side. And a really good example of that is, I first started playing our tabletop RPGs with D&D 3.5, and it had an issue. Well, it had an issue for me, something I personally disliked, where it had something called, that has been referred to a lot as the magic item treadmill, where there was the default assumption that you had magic items giving you specific numerical bonuses at each level to keep pace with the math of the game. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So, like, at level, like, I'm spitballing here because it's been a very long time since I played it. It's like, at level 3, you're expected to have like a +1 sword or whatever your weapon is supposed to be, and +1 armor. And like at level 7, it should be +2, and so on and so forth. And personally, I really hated that, because both as a player and as a GM, I find it incredibly boring when, you discover a new magic item and it's just the numerical bonus to keep you relevant. Boring. I don't enjoy it.
Like, don't get me wrong, it can be useful, but if it's a broadsword +3, or you could just, broadsword +3, let's just call it the sword of a bat or something. I say that because I'm looking at a Batman.
Yeah, and like, so I much more prefer, both when I'm giving and receiving magical items, that they be stuff that does something different, or like at least gives your character maybe more options to what they can do. Like, I don't care about +1 swords, but a sword that's on fire, that's cool. You can do interesting things with that. You can light it on fire. It's more useful against, monsters who are weak to fire. It's less useful against monsters that are made of fire. Like, it adds narrative interest that a +1 sword doesn't. And so what I did is I spent a fair bit of time going through, and like, I looked at the wealth by level charts. I mapped out exactly what levels they expect you to get these bonuses at. And then I just removed those weapons from the game entirely and added in those numerical bonuses. Just at level 3, you get a +1 to your weapon attacks. At level 7, you get a +2 to your weapon attacks. And I reduced the amount of gold they got per level, so it all balanced out with, those weapons no longer existing, so that mechanically they were still in the same place. Like, they were still keeping pace with the math, and all the assumptions of the game's math still worked. It's just now those numerical bonuses that they advance into were baked into them leveling up, and not them finding, plus X gear that they required. And then I was able to take all those magic items that they were giving out and either eliminate them if they were boring and didn't do anything at all, or change them to something more interesting, context dependent. And that is homebrew. I created a system that modified the base of the game because part of the system of the game annoyed me and I didn't like it. So I changed how it worked. And I felt so much catharsis when Pathfinder came out, and one of the alternate rules that they had for it was almost exactly the homebrew rule set I had designed to take those numerical weapons out.
I bet that would have felt so rewarding when you look at it, it's like, yep, I told you that other idea was shit.
Like it was when I first saw it, it was like, oh sweet, they did the same, they did something to fulfill the same goal that I had. Great, now I don't need to rejig it all for Pathfinder. And then I was looking through it, and it's like, wow, this is like, some small differences here and there, but this is almost exactly what I did for mine, and that just makes me feel good.
And that just shows that the original system was clearly not popular for a lot of people.
Yeah, and like it is an optional rule, so like it is something that the GM has to decide that they're going to use, because that's, I guess, actually another thing to note on in just in the terms of house rules, is that a lot of systems, especially crunchier systems, may offer alternate rule systems that are quote unquote official. Like, they're in the book, but they're not assumed to be part of the default play experience, or something that the GM can decide they want to use. So they're not homebrew, but they're not the default rule set either. They're officially provided rules that you can choose to include.
Right, that makes sense. It's
Yeah,
and I suppose like that someone's like, but that's just a GM homebrewing their own, or the company homebrewing their own adventures. Like, no, that's a company giving GMs options if, or giving them ideas if they don't know how to homebrew as to where to start.
yeah, and I find, like, the most important word in the homebrew is the home part of it,
Yeah,
because it's you at your table deciding to make these changes for the game that you are playing. If a company that's like, I've had this argument with some people, and it annoys the hell out of me, so we're touching on it. But like, that's kind of like saying that, if Dodge has, a truck that they only offer in gray and blue, and they give you the option to have it in red. That option isn't, you homebrewing red onto the truck. The company provided you that option.
it's an additional option they are willing to offer. It's not.
Exactly.
It's different if it's, well, it's off. We typically offer it in gray and blue, but for you, we'll do it in red. The difference here is like, well, I'll get the gray because that's going to be easier for me to paint it over with hot pink leopard print or something.
Exactly.
I'm just now picturing a hot pink leopard print
Me
truck.
too, and it's amazing.
Yeah. Which does entirely go back to the nature of homebrewing, is that there's a difference between, like you said, features available in a car versus things you're actively customizing and putting in.
Exactly.
It it is not unlike your hair. It's one thing to cut it into a mohawk or a different style. That's just adjusting what's already there. It's entirely different to then go about and dye it a different color, right? Like that would
Yeah. Dye it a different
one
color, or put in extensions, or get hair plugs
exactly,
or something along those lines.
exactly. And to be clear, folks, I don't give two shits if you choose to do any of these things. You do what you need to do.
Oh yeah, no, I've got a purple mohawk right now. By all means, it's your own body. Do whatever the hell you want with it.
Exactly. Uh, I miss having hair. Now that said,
Well, you're rocking that sweet mustache right now. That still counts.
yeah, um, it's funny. This is going to tangent. It's funny. I've never thought of having hair plugs, and when the thought or someone said, "Why don't you get a hair plug?" I'm like, because I can spend that money on a vacation, and I don't mind being bald.
Yeah,
However, if someone would rather get hair plugs or a hair transplant, that's fine. Like more power to you. It's just not a thing for me.
exactly. But yeah, so to kind of pull back into what we briefly touched on before, and I didn't want to get tangented on too hard. Players very much can offer homebrew suggestions, but generally speaking, the GM has to agree to homebrew to happen, even if the player is suggesting it. And most of the time that players will suggest homebrew, it's in my personal experience, generally because say like you want to play Lizard Man and the game doesn't offer any lizard men by default. So you go online and you look up like, lizard man homebrew for this system, and then you find a really cool thing that details out how to play lizard men. So you send it over to your GM and you say, hey, can I play this? And the GM takes one look at it and go, ha, God, that is poorly balanced. No.
I think that if you're going to do that as a player, have experience playing games first in the first place, and then the flip side is, well, I want to play a lizard man. He's going to be, let's say we're going to base it, he's close enough to being a human, so we're going to adjust a couple of things, lower intelligence maybe because he's cold blooded.
Yeah. Give him a bit tougher skin or a bite
Yeah,
or something like that.
exactly. Increase certain things like that. Like there's going to be ways you could do it without even looking something up. And you take it to the gym and like, hey, here's my lizard man. Like, the intelligence is really low, right? Like, well, I was thinking maybe the more he's awake or the warmer it gets, the more intelligent he gets. But as a default state in this world, he's dumb as rocks.
Hmm.
Not unlike the trolls in the Discworld.
I
When
was
it's
just
cold,
going to reference them. Just finished rereading Guards, and
I'm currently reading Guards. I'm loving it. I tend to read. I only ever pick up Discworld when I'm either in a slump or I want something just funny, but it's also really well done. Like there's a lot of good books out. This is a tangent, I know. There's a lot of good books out that are amusing, but there's nothing like Discworld for being funny, remarkably insightful,
mm-hmm.
really well put together and eminently quotable. Like, how many times have you actually seen in business school people use Corporal Carrot's boots or is it Sam Vimes' boots philosophy?
Yep. And and this sounds terrible, but I'm not backing down from it. It's also really nice to have a book series that I cherish that the author died before anything terrible could come out about them.
I to to your point, even after he died, nothing bad has come out about him.
Yeah, like like nothing like Terry Pratchett. Nobody that, to my knowledge, has ever had a bad word to say about that man. And like, there's been long after his death, there's been zero. Oh, this scandal or that scandal. It's like, no, he was a great guy,
He
which
was a
is
great guy.
which is
Yep.
refreshing with
And
some other ones that I had to stop appreciating after
I
heard.
I have gotten rid of a couple of books by a certain author. I was
Yeah,
excited to read him. Like, oh, that's a cool book. Oh, it's by him.
yeah, I've
Well, I'm giving that away because I don't even want to profit from it.
yeah, I've I'm kind of on the stance right now that I'm not getting rid of the books I already have just because
It
I'm
only
not
hurts
giving.
you.
Yeah, it only hurts me. I'm not. They're not profiting by any more than they already have by me holding on to these books. I'm
Which,
not. Yeah.
yeah, I was also looking for an excuse to thin out some of the books I had, and that was as good a one as I could find.
Although that does remind me, thinking of players introducing homebrew, we need to do an episode on player entitlement at some point because that'll be a rich minefield that I'm sure all the players are going to love listening
Oh,
to.
there is a better than average chance that's going to be next episode because now I'm making a note of it, and it's something that you're right. It is very much an issue across the board. Because
But
I don't want to get into that, and we all know that's where it's about to go if we keep going on that road.
hmm
Bringing in a character who has elements of homebrew. I recall when I was coming up with uh, the the clockwork character that I'm using for Shadow of the Demon Lord. Again, folks, this isn't Shadow of the Demon Lord game that Anko is running isn't a typical game in terms of a lot of role playing. So I asked him flat out, I'm like, can I effectively play? Because I really like the clockwork mechanic, and
mm,
I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I also find it hilarious when they die and blow up.
yep.
So I asked him, like, can I have the same soul keep coming back into various different bodies, and eventually at some point maybe I get a different character whilst that other one's coming back in a different point. And Anchor's like, I see no reason that this can't be a thing, because it would be absolutely fantastic if the character comes back in an entirely different body, looks at the dwarf and says, hello, and like, who the hell are you? Like, oh, I died a week or two ago and I'm back. And
You
it's
what?
yeah, exactly. So it was one of those questions that I had, and given the nature of the game, it's like, yeah, that's fine, no worries. But again, like it was an agreement that we had. It doesn't really impact anything. It's almost entirely for narrative purposes for myself.
Yeah. Now,
That
having said that, and I'm going to keep the bulk of this to next episode because, God, I will tangent hardcore on that. Keeping in mind for all you astute listeners out there, he asked about it. He didn't just show up at the table and say, this is what I'm doing, which is kind of an important bit.
right
But
now,
who.
because we know where this is going, folks. If you've listened to us for any number of previous episodes, you know how hard we are trying not to go down the rabbit hole that we keep going down.
Just circling around it. All right, homebrew. Keep talking about homebrew.
All right. Now, the question in regards to, so we have player homebrew, and it can be a thing. It
Mm,
the like you said, the nature of it is very much. I really want to play this type of character. Like I want to play a wolf man. Is that a possibility? And if the GM says yes, how are you going to build it? Well, I was going to use this werewolf thing, but kind of decrease the stats because he's half man, half wolf, or whatever my vision is. But he's not going to be as strong as this enemy character I'm thinking of, and more in line with more human stats. The GM were like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm fine with that. But because you have claws, that means you're going to have a penalty to holding a weapon unless it's big and beefy.
yeah. And it's something that really kind of cuts in how people tend to appreciate roleplay is that when it comes to, hey, can we change this to be this? Reskinning works for a lot of things. Like, oh, I want to play an elf, but there's no elves in this game. Okay, use the human stat block and just say you have pointy ears and live for a long time, whatever. Some people are just fine with that because it's just, yeah, the mechanics don't really matter to me. It's just, I want to have pointy ears and say I live a really long time. But I know for example, for me, I I want my narrative decisions to have like mechanical reinforcement to them. So like if I want to continue the analogy because it's working for me, if I want to play an elf, I want there to be some form of mechanical difference between me playing an elf and me playing a human. It doesn't need to. It's not necessarily I'm better for being an elf. It's just, there is something mechanically different that differentiates it. Because for me, I really enjoy the systems. I enjoy engaging with the systems of a game. It's part of the reason why, despite moving over to simpler systems over the years, every time I get the chance to play a more crunchy system, I jump at it because I will tweak and fiddle with those numbers and options forever and just gets my dopamine receptors lighten up. So that's where a lot of homebrew comes from because reskinning I wouldn't even really consider homebrew for the most part because it's there's not really any brewing involved in that case. It's just you're saying, oh, you want to play an elf, cool, your human stat block has pointy ears. There was no crafting done in that. but if you say, oh, you want to play an elf and there's no elves in this, okay, so if we, use this mechanic, and how about we use this mechanic and we'll see how this works and we'll tweak it later on if we need to. That's actively making mechanical changes, and that's where I would consider it to be homebrew, because you're crafting and you're making something out of it.
That's a really interesting concept, and I 100% understand what you're saying when you say I was just tweaking a character. Even if you don't always get a chance to play it, I to liken it to something, I'll often, if I have an RPG video game, will spend hours tweaking the character that I have, the looks that I want.
Yep.
And oh, that's cool. I really enjoyed making that one. Now let's go make something else. And I don't actually progress the story. I remember when I was starting to play Baldur's Gate 3, I created 3 full characters that I was thinking of playing,
Mhm.
chose none of them, and went for something entirely different. I
I mean,
spent more time in character creation than I did actually playing the game because I was about an hour and a half in. I'm like, I am not enjoying the game mechanics, because it does like a random number generator for a roll,
mhm.
and I would much rather be able to just if I'm going to play that kind of game, I would rather have a physical roll,
Yeah.
right? And it's funny, I don't mind playing it in uh, like Dragon Age or the Elder Scrolls, where it's effectively the same thing. You have a 50% chance to do this, and the random number generator is in the background. It works or it doesn't. For some reason, watching the die roll on the screen, I'm like, I don't like this. Like for whatever reason, I don't like this, because there's not the as we've touched on before, there wasn't the celebration. I wasn't able to celebrate, or like
Yep.
I rolled an actual 20 and a 6, the two highest possible combinations on the die that I needed, and I can just stand there with my arms up until someone comes to verify, because there's no way I'm I again, for context, I'm behind the work counter. My stuff is on the counter. So if there's a roll that I like, I think you need to check this, because I don't know if you're going to believe me otherwise. I'll
And
just
it's
stand there with
fun to
my arms
share.
back until someone does.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I've had a really hard time getting into Baldur's Gate 3 because it's just constantly reminding me of what I'd rather be doing, which is rolling dice on the table with
Hmm.
my friends, because it has that artifice of, oh, here's the roll that you're making. It's like, yeah, but if I get a crit, I can't go kick ass, guys. Look at this. It's just okay. It showed me the max number. Yay.
Exactly. Like all for me, all I would have to do is have an option to take that die rolling thing away. I
Yeah.
get that it's a key thing for a lot of people.
And
For me, it doesn't work.
it reminds me of the artifice.
Hmm.
Like, it's harder to stay invested in the story when you're playing a video game and the video game is blatantly reminding you of the mechanics, and like not even the mechanics of the game, because like the game isn't actually rolling a d20. It's an artificial layer of mechanics that don't
Hmm.
actually do anything, that just pulls you out of the story, and I'm not fond of it. But anyway.
It's ironically why if I was going to go back to it, I play it on the easiest possible story setting, because you're trying to experience the story as opposed to anything. Anyway, so
But
we
to
could we could go for hours, and I'm sure at
one
some point we'll talk about RPG like video games
one
down the
thing I
road.
do one thing I do really want to touch on before we
Mm.
move past this, because I was thinking about it when you're talking about making your character. I have systems sitting on my shelf that I have easily poured dozens of hours into making characters for and making monsters for, and I've never played the system. But it's so much fun because of the mechanical heft to making these things.
Hmm.
It's so much fun for me to sit down and go, hey, how would I make this type of character? Like, one thing I really like to do with, and this is has nothing to do with homebrew, but we're tangenting. We'll get back to it. But one thing I always love to do when I get a new system is I have my favorite character that I've ever played on a tabletop RPG. I can't remember if I don't think you were around for at the time. It was when our primary GM was running Hell's Rebels for Pathfinder.
Yeah. No, I wasn't around for that one.
And my character in that was this little like gnomish pyromancer who was just absolutely crazy, and I loved him. And what I tend to do now, every time I get a new system, like a new fantasy system, is I'll see, okay, if I were to make this character in this system, how could I best go about doing that? It's really interesting because you get into the arguments a lot online. I don't know if they're still happening. I haven't really tuned in much, but for a while there, there was the constant arguments. It's like, oh, the system doesn't matter. Like, you can play any game in any system. It's just what matters is the people at the table. It's like, yes, but also no, because the system, constrains what you can do and it funnels your thought process. Because like if half of the rule book is about you know how to kill things and different ways you can kill things and how to improve on killing things, the players are going to want to kill things because that's what the game book is showing all them the cool options for. But
Yeah, like
if your rule book it has like large chunks of like social encounters and like a page of how to actually get into a physical fight, you're going in with the expectation that combat isn't going to happen very much, which is why translating that one character to different systems is so interesting. Because like, hey, it's like in this system he's like this, but in this system he's the same idea but functionally very different to get
mm,
that same idea across.
I often think that when you have that expectation starting up as a player, it's always good to, like you said, get an idea as to how it's going to work. And that seems like a fantastic way to do it, is to just create the same character across multiple things. Ironically, it's not too different from what I do when I'm playing a video game with a fantasy element. It's the same core character, just modified slightly.
But
Now,
that
before we go either into video games again or touch back on character creation across multiple game systems, is there anything else you wanted to touch on homebrew? And again, these are probably going to be topics for later episodes. If you've listened to us for a time, you've probably noticed that halfway through the episode we're recording, oh, that's a great idea, we'll do that at another time. And then another time is either next week or the next episode or the one after. So when we say we might touch on these later, we really will actually come back to it at some point. It might not be.
which does remind me, I mean, for all of the tens of listeners we probably have at this point, if if there is anything that you guys like want to hear us talk about, send us an email or sound off in the comments, because I'm 100% down for listener suggestions
Yeah,
for what to talk about.
and because Anko led off with send us an email, the email is readynerdgo@gmail.com. Really complicated.
Probably should have included that part, huh?
I didn't give you a chance. Although speaking of emails, if again we're gonna remind people because we forgot what episode we announced this in, and this is as much a case for us to remember. Right now, we did it in episode 13. If you recognize the quotes that we're putting on in the subject titles, send us an email, and we have a couple of things that we'll send out to the first person to actually actively get the first 10 episodes, get the two pieces of media correct.
Yeah, and we actually have what figured out at this point too, so we're great.
Yeah, it's I'm excited for it, and I'm hoping that you will be. So again, it's not like a huge game thing because we have to ship it, and
Yeah,
shipping is miserable at times. So
don't expect Gloomhaven is all I'm saying.
totally fair, totally fair. I've never played Gloomhaven. At some point, I should.
It is fun, but it's one of those ones that works better as a video game because setting up and breaking down takes so bloody long.
Yeah, yeah. All right, now that's actually a really valid point,
Yeah.
and I'm sure we'll come back to get tabletop games that should have been video games in the future. I don't know if you have anything else you want to bring up.
I mean, I think I covered most of what I intended to get across this episode. Generally what homebrewing is, when you shouldn't do it, which I honestly find a more important topic than when you should do it,
Mm-hmm.
and like how to do it. But I guess touching on the how to do it, one thing I do want to point out is pretty much every game that you've heard of, pretty much every game that you've heard of and have heard people talking about, there's going to be a community somewhere that you can talk to about homebrewing for it. And the more eyes like on any creative project, getting other people's eyes on it is a really good way to check if you've overlooked something, or get people who have been homebrewing for a very long time that can tell you, yeah, no, that looks good, or no, that's way too overpowered, slim that back, or wow, you made that so weak, have you tried doing this?
And I think, to Anko's point, for most things there would be a community, and if there isn't, it's because either the thing is too new or you haven't started it yet.
Exactly. And some of those creators that are actually making these games would love for you to get out and talk about them, because it's the common joke in the industry of, how do you make $1 million in the tabletop RPGs? You start with $1 billion. Nobody's really making money in this. It's almost all passionate creators who usually started out homebrewing other systems. Like the vast majority of people making D&D Heartbreakers started off playing D&D and kept making homebrew rules for it until they got the point of, what, I'm just going to make my own system. And that's how a lot of people go. That's where the term fantasy heartbreaker came from, was the sheer amount of people going, oh, I don't like how D&D does it, I'm going to make my own version that's going to be better. And honestly, there's a lot of better versions out there right now that just don't have the traction or support, because D&D and Wizards of the Coast is the 8,000-pound gorilla in the room.
I think you've just given us an idea for another episode, whether you know it or not. And that is going to be talking about systems or games out there that don't get the traction, and specifically naming them and encouraging folks to give them a try.
Oh, I mean, I would absolutely love to do small games that don't get enough love, because my choices are not going to be other people's choices. That's half the fun of it. Is I may have heard of games that most of the people who are out there haven't, or vice versa. Some people might say, "Oh, why didn't you talk about this one?" And I'll go, "I haven't heard of it before. That looks really cool. I'll have to check it out." That's the fun thing about the community, is I've definitely come across games where I've never heard of them before, never would have heard of them if I wasn't talking to somebody in the RPG community who said, "Oh man, I really love how this system does this." And then I go look at it. It's like, "Oh, that is really cool. I'm going to, grab that PDF from them off of DriveThru or itch.io and, throw $5 their way and
And
enjoy
give it a
reading the
shout.
thing, even if I never get to play it."
Yeah. So if you're listening and you are a homebrewer, you have your own system out there on the platforms Anko just mentioned, let us know, because we are going to craft an episode that is going to specifically talk about that kind of thing. And
You
I
have
should, I,
you have no idea how many people might just flood in because of that.
I
It's just, hey,
am,
engagement.
hey, what the thing is, we're all about getting people into tabletop RPGs. There's
Hmm.
no reason we can't now also say, hey, now you're into tabletop RPGs, try these other things.
Oh yeah.
And even if it's a case of this is our bi-monthly advertising episode, I don't care. Like it's something that I think we're going to end up being passionate about. So I lost my thought.
Yeah, I think we're at the winding down part of today's episode.
I think, yeah, well, see, I was waiting for you to say something that I could say game on and end with, because you did the intro, and now I've realized that I never told you that. So now I'm like, well, I'm waiting for Anko to wind down.
I mean, that you could have just said game on and that would have worked really well.
Game on.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.